Mother Bear showed up at the maternity ward, cradling a newborn. What happened next was shocking. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The automatic doors of Cedar Valley Hospital slid open with their usual soft whisper, but what stepped through them made every person in the maternity ward freeze in absolute terror. A massive brown bear, her thick fur matted with mud and pine needles, moved slowly across the polished white floor. Her dark eyes held something that defied all logic: gentleness. And cradled against her chest, wrapped in what looked like a torn piece of fabric, was a tiny human baby. Nurse Riley Blackwood dropped the clipboard she was holding. The metal clattered against the floor, echoing through the suddenly silent hallway like a gunshot. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she watched the impossible scene unfold before her eyes. The bear was enormous, easily 7 feet tall even on all fours, but she moved with the careful precision of a mother carrying precious cargo. "Dear God," whispered Dr. Mara Steele from behind the nurse's station. Her hands trembled as she reached for the emergency phone, but something stopped her. The bear wasn't growling or showing any signs of aggression. Instead, she seemed to be looking for something, or someone. The newborn in the bear's arms stirred, letting out a weak cry that pierced the silence. The sound made Riley's maternal instincts kick in despite her fear. She had been working in this maternity ward for 8 years, and she had never heard a cry quite like that one. It was the sound of a baby who had been fighting to survive for far too long. 20 feet away, in room 237, new mother Isabella Cross sat up in her hospital bed. She had given birth to her daughter Maya just 2 days ago, and the sound of another baby crying made her look toward the door. What she saw made her blood turn to ice. A wild animal was standing in her hospital, holding what appeared to be a human infant. But as Isabella stared at the scene, something strange happened. The bear turned her massive head and looked directly at her through the open doorway. Their eyes met, and Isabella felt a jolt of recognition that made no sense. The bear's expression wasn't wild or dangerous. It was desperate, pleading. "Someone call security," Dr. Steele whispered, but her voice carried no urgency. She was transfixed by what she was witnessing. The bear had lowered herself to a sitting position, still cradling the baby with infinite care. The fabric wrapped around the infant was stained with dirt and what looked like dried blood, but the baby appeared unharmed. Nurse Riley took a small step forward, her training overriding her fear. "The baby," she said softly. "Is the baby hurt?" The bear's ears twitched at the sound of her voice. She looked down at the bundle in her arms, then back up at Riley. In that moment, Riley could have sworn she saw tears in the animal's dark eyes. From her bed, Isabella watched the exchange with growing fascination. Her own daughter Maya was sleeping peacefully in the bassinet beside her, but Isabella found herself unable to look away from the other baby. There was something about the way the bear held the child, something that reminded her of her own desperate need to protect Maya at all costs. "Where did you come from?" Isabella whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was talking to the bear or the baby. The bear's head snapped toward her voice again. This time, she began to move slowly toward Isabella's room, her massive paws making barely a sound on the hospital floor. Riley and Dr. Steele watched in amazement as the wild animal approached the new mother with the deliberate care of someone bringing a gift. Isabella's heart raced, but she didn't feel afraid. Instead, she felt drawn to this creature who had somehow found her way into their sterile, safe world, carrying a child who clearly needed help. The bear stopped at the foot of Isabella's bed and gently extended her arms, offering the baby to her. "I don't understand," Isabella breathed, but she found herself reaching out anyway. Her hands shook as she carefully took the infant from the bear's grasp. The baby was cold and thin, clearly malnourished, but alive. Very much alive. The moment the baby was safely in Isabella's arms, the bear let out a sound that was part relief, part exhaustion. She settled back on her haunches and watched as Isabella instinctively began to check the infant for injuries. "It's a girl," Isabella said softly, her voice filled with wonder. "She's so small, so cold." Dr. Steele finally found her voice. "We need to get that baby to the NICU immediately. Riley, call pediatrics. And someone please figure out how to safely remove a 700-pound bear from our maternity ward." But as the doctor spoke, something incredible happened. The bear began to back away slowly, her mission apparently complete. She had delivered the baby safely into human hands, and now she was ready to leave. She moved toward the exit with the same careful grace she had shown upon arrival. "Wait," Isabella called out, surprising herself. The bear paused and looked back at her one final time. "Thank you," Isabella said, tears streaming down her face. "Wherever you found her, thank you for bringing her to us." The bear held her gaze for a long moment, then turned and walked back through the automatic doors into the night. By the time security arrived, she had vanished into the forest that surrounded the hospital like she had never been there at all. But the baby remained, safe and warm in Isabella's arms, about to begin a journey that would change everything anyone thought they knew about the bonds between mothers and the lengths they would go to protect their children. The silence that followed the bear's departure was broken only by the soft beeping of medical equipment and the distant sound of sirens approaching the hospital. Dr. Steele rushed to Isabella's bedside, her professional instincts finally overriding her shock at what she had just witnessed. "We need to examine this baby immediately," Dr. Steele said, gently reaching for the infant. But as she tried to take the child from Isabella's arms, something unexpected happened. The baby's tiny fingers curled around Isabella's thumb with surprising strength, and she let out a soft cooing sound that made Isabella's heart skip a beat. "She doesn't want to let go," Isabella whispered, looking down at the small face that was now peaceful and calm. The baby's eyes were a striking shade of green, almost identical to Isabella's own. It was probably just a coincidence, but something about this child felt familiar in a way that made no sense. Nurse Riley approached with a portable examination kit, her hands still shaking slightly from the encounter with the bear. "I've never seen anything like that in my life," she said, setting up her equipment. "In 30 years of nursing, I've seen a lot of strange things, but never a wild animal bringing a baby to safety." Dr. Steele began her examination while the baby remained in Isabella's arms. The infant was underweight, probably around 5 pounds, and showed signs of exposure to the elements. Her skin was pale and slightly mottled from the cold, but her vital signs were surprisingly strong. "This baby is maybe 2 weeks old," Dr. Steele observed, checking the infant's reflexes. "But she's been surviving on her own for days, maybe longer. How is that even possible?" Isabella found herself studying every detail of the child's face. There was something about the shape of her nose, the way her ears curved, that triggered a memory she couldn't quite grasp. "Doctor, could you run a blood test? I know this sounds crazy, but I think I might know who this baby is." "Isabella, you've just given birth yourself. You're probably experiencing some hormonal confusion," Dr. Steele said gently. "It's natural to feel protective of any infant right now." But Isabella shook her head firmly. "No, it's more than that. Look at her birthmark." She carefully moved the torn fabric that had been wrapped around the baby, revealing a small crescent-shaped mark on the infant's left shoulder. Isabella's eyes widened in recognition. My sister Elena had a birthmark exactly like that, Isabella said, her voice barely above a whisper. She disappeared 6 months ago when she was 8 months pregnant. The police said she probably had an accident somewhere in the national forest, but they never found her body, or her baby. The room fell silent as the implications of Isabella's words sank in. Nurse Riley stopped what she was doing and stared at the baby in Isabella's arms. Dr. Steele's expression shifted from professional concern to something approaching disbelief. Isabella, are you saying you think this is your sister's child? Dr. Steele asked carefully. I don't think it. I know it. Isabella's voice was growing stronger with each word. Elena was supposed to name her daughter Sophia. She had everything planned out. She was going to move in with me after the baby was born because the father had left her. Isabella gently touched the baby's face, and the infant turned toward her touch with the instinctive movement of a child seeking comfort. Sophia, Isabella whispered, and the baby's eyes seemed to focus on her for the first time. Dr. Steele pulled out her phone. I'm calling the police. If this is true, if this baby is your niece, then we need to contact the authorities immediately. They'll want to know about the bear, about where she might have found the child. But as Dr. Steele spoke, Isabella was remembering something else, something that made her blood run cold. Elena told me she had been camping near Bear Creek when she disappeared. She said she felt safe there because she had always had a special connection with animals. Even as a child, wild animals would approach her without fear. Nurse Riley looked confused. What are you saying? I'm saying that maybe the bear didn't just randomly find Sophia in the woods, Isabella said slowly. Maybe she was protecting her. Maybe she's been taking care of her this whole time. The idea seemed impossible, but as Isabella held the baby close, she noticed something else. Sophia's hair was clean, despite the dirt on her makeshift blanket. Her fingernails were trimmed short, and there were no signs of insect bites or scratches that would be expected from a baby surviving alone in the wilderness. Someone has been caring for this child, Dr. Steele observed, coming to the same conclusion. But the question is who? Isabella's mind was racing. She remembered the look in the bear's eyes, the way she had held Sophia with such gentle care, the way she had looked directly at Isabella, as if she knew exactly who she was bringing the baby to. What if Elena didn't die in an accident? Isabella said suddenly. What if something else happened? What if she's still out there? Before anyone could respond, Sophia began to cry again, but this time it was different. It was the hungry cry of a baby who needed to be fed. Isabella looked down at her own sleeping daughter Maya, then at Sophia, and made a decision that surprised even herself. I'm going to nurse her, Isabella announced. She's starving, and I have milk. Dr. Steele started to protest, but Isabella was already positioning Sophia for feeding. The moment the baby latched on, she settled into a peaceful rhythm that seemed to come naturally to both of them. This is extraordinary, Nurse Riley whispered. It's like she knows you. Isabella felt tears streaming down her face as she watched Sophia feed. The baby's tiny hand rested against Isabella's chest, and she could feel the rapid beat of the infant's heart gradually slowing to a more normal rhythm as she filled her empty stomach. Elena, where are you? Isabella whispered into the quiet room. What happened to you out there? Outside the window, the first light of dawn was beginning to creep across the sky, casting long shadows through the hospital corridors. But somewhere in the darkness of the forest that surrounded Cedar Valley Hospital, other eyes were watching. eyes that had been waiting for this moment for weeks. The bear had completed the first part of her mission. Now the real work would begin. Deep in the woods, where the moonlight barely penetrated the thick canopy of trees, a figure moved slowly through the underbrush. She was thin, exhausted, and her clothes were torn from weeks of surviving in the wilderness. But her eyes held the fierce determination of a mother who would do anything to ensure her child's safety. Elena Cross was alive, and she was coming home. 2 hours later, the hospital was buzzing with activity that had nothing to do with normal medical procedures. Detective Marcus Kane stood in the maternity ward, notebook in hand, trying to make sense of what the staff was telling him. He had been a cop for 15 years, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for a report about a wild bear delivering a missing baby to a hospital. "Let me get this straight," Detective Kane said, looking at Dr. Steele with skeptical eyes. "A 700-pound brown bear walked through your front doors, carrying a human infant, and handed the baby over to a patient before walking back out into the forest." "That's exactly what happened, Doctor," Steele replied firmly. "We have security footage if you need proof." Isabella sat in her hospital bed, still holding Sophia close to her chest. The baby had been fed, examined, and declared remarkably healthy considering her circumstances. But Isabella couldn't shake the feeling that there was so much more to this story than anyone realized. "Detective Kane," Isabella said, "I need you to understand something. This isn't just any baby. This is my sister Elena's daughter. Elena disappeared 6 months ago while she was pregnant, and everyone assumed she was dead." Detective Kane pulled up a chair beside Isabella's bed. "Mrs. Cross, I remember your sister's case. We searched those woods for weeks. There was no trace of her after her car was found abandoned near the Bear Creek trailhead." "But what if she survived?" Isabella pressed. "What if she's been living out there all this time? The bear brought Sophia here for a reason. Maybe Elena sent her." The detective's expression softened slightly. He had worked Elena's missing person case personally, and had felt terrible when they had to call off the search. "Mrs. Cross, I understand you want to believe your sister's alive, but the chances of someone surviving 6 months in the wilderness, especially while pregnant—" "Look at this baby," Isabella interrupted, adjusting Sophia in her arms so the detective could see her clearly. "She's been cared for. Someone has been keeping her clean, fed, and safe. Wild animals don't do that." Before Detective Kane could respond, Nurse Riley approached the group with a puzzled expression on her face. "Detective, you might want to see this. We found something in the fabric that was wrapped around the baby." She handed him a small, crumpled piece of paper that had been tucked deep into the folds of the torn cloth. Detective Kane carefully unfolded it, and his eyes widened as he read the faded handwriting. "What does it say?" Isabella asked urgently. Detective Kane cleared his throat. "It says, her name is Sophia Elena Cross. Born October 15th. Please take care of her. Tell Isabella I'm sorry I couldn't come myself. Elena." The silence that followed was broken only by Sophia's soft breathing and the distant sound of morning traffic outside the hospital windows. Isabella felt her world tilt on its axis. Her sister was alive. Not only alive, but she had been close enough to the hospital to know that Isabella was here. "There's more," Detective Kane continued, studying the note. "It looks like there's a map drawn on the back." He turned the paper over to reveal a crude but detailed sketch of the forest area around Bear Creek. Several landmarks were marked, including what appeared to be a cave system that wasn't on any official maps of the area. Dr. Steele leaned in to examine the map. "Those caves, I remember hearing about them when I was growing up here. Local legends said they were sacred to the indigenous tribes, places where animals would go to give birth safely. Sacred birthing caves, Isabella whispered, pieces of a puzzle beginning to fall into place. Elena always said she felt most peaceful in natural places. What if she found shelter there? Detective Kane was already reaching for his radio. I'm calling for a search and rescue team. If Elena Cross is alive and hiding in those caves, we need to find her immediately. But as he spoke, Isabella was studying the baby in her arms with growing amazement. Sophia had been born in the wilderness, delivered by her mother with no medical assistance, and had somehow survived for weeks in conditions that should have been impossible for a newborn. "Detective," Isabella said slowly, "what if Elena isn't hiding? What if she can't come to us? What do you mean? What if she's injured? What if she sent the bear because she couldn't make the journey herself?" The thought sent a chill through everyone in the room. If Elena was badly hurt and stranded somewhere in the forest, time could be running out. "We need to move fast," Detective Kane said, already heading for the door. "I'm organizing a search party right now." But Isabella called out to stop him. "Wait, take me with you." Everyone in the room turned to stare at her. Dr. Steele was the first to object. "Isabella, you gave birth 2 days ago. You're in no condition to go hiking through the wilderness." "Elena is my sister," Isabella said firmly. "She sent her baby to me specifically. She trusts me. If she's out there scared and hurt, she needs to see a familiar face." "Mrs. Cross," Detective Kane said gently, "I understand your feelings, but this could be dangerous. We don't know what condition your sister might be in, or what other animals might be in those caves." Isabella looked down at Sophia, who was sleeping peacefully in her arms, then over at her own daughter Maya in the bassinet nearby. 2 babies, both depending on her to make the right choice. "She saved her baby's life by trusting that bear," Isabella said quietly. "The least I can do is trust my instincts too." Before anyone could argue further, a commotion in the hallway caught their attention. Nurse Riley rushed to the window and gasped at what she saw outside. "You need to see this," she said urgently. Everyone crowded around the window to look out at the hospital's front entrance. There, standing at the edge of the parking lot where the asphalt met the forest, was the same brown bear who had brought Sophia to them. But she wasn't alone. 2 smaller bears, probably her own cubs, flanked her on either side. All 3 animals were looking directly up at the maternity ward windows, as if they were waiting for something. "She came back," Isabella breathed. "She's trying to tell us something." Detective Kane stared at the scene below with growing unease. In all his years of law enforcement, he had never encountered anything like this. Animals didn't behave this way. They didn't form search parties or deliver lost children to hospitals. "There's something else going on here," he muttered, more to himself than to the others. "Something we're not understanding." As if responding to his words, the mother bear began to move. But instead of approaching the hospital again, she started walking slowly toward the forest, stopping every few steps to look back at the building. Her cubs followed her lead, creating an unmistakable message. They wanted to be followed. Isabella made her decision in that moment. "I'm going with them." "Isabella, no," Dr. Steele protested. "This is madness." But Isabella was already getting out of bed, carefully cradling Sophia against her chest. Elena trusted that bear with her daughter's life. Now that bear is asking us to trust her. How can I say no? Detective Kane realized that nothing he said was going to change Isabella's mind. He had seen that same determination in Elena's eyes during the initial investigation into her disappearance. The Cross sisters were stubborn, brave, and fiercely loyal to each other. "If you're going to do this," he said with a heavy sigh. "Then I'm going with you, and we're taking a full medical team just in case." Isabella nodded gratefully. "Thank you." As the group prepared to leave the hospital, none of them noticed a figure watching from the shadows of the forest. Elena Cross stood hidden behind a massive pine tree, tears streaming down her face as she watched her sister prepare to come looking for her. She had been surviving in the wilderness for 6 months, living in caves, foraging for food, and relying on the protection of a bear family who had inexplicably adopted her as one of their own. But the birth of her daughter had changed everything. Sophia was too small, too fragile to survive much longer in the wild. Elena had made the hardest decision of her life when she asked her bear protector to take Sophia to safety. She had written the note with charcoal from her campfire, drawn the map with shaking hands, and wrapped her precious baby in the only clean fabric she had left. Now, watching through binoculars she had salvaged from an abandoned campsite weeks earlier, Elena could see that her plan had worked. Sophia was safe in Isabella's arms. Her sister would take care of her daughter, would give her the life Elena couldn't provide in the wilderness. But there was one thing Elena hadn't counted on. She hadn't expected Isabella to come looking for her, and she definitely hadn't expected the complications that were about to unfold when they found her hiding place. Because Elena wasn't alone in those caves. She had been sharing her shelter with someone else for the past 3 months, someone who had been presumed dead even longer than she had, someone whose presence would turn this already impossible story into something that would challenge everything anyone thought they knew about survival, family, and the mysterious ways that life finds a way to continue even in the darkest circumstances. The search party assembled outside Cedar Valley Hospital within an hour, though it looked nothing like any rescue operation Detective Kane had ever organized. Instead of following traditional search protocols, they were preparing to trail 3 wild bears through unmarked wilderness, guided by the hand-drawn map of a woman who had been missing for 6 months. Isabella sat in the passenger seat of the lead vehicle, Sophia sleeping peacefully in a portable carrier beside her. Dr. Steele had insisted on coming along, bringing a full medical kit and portable emergency equipment. The detective had reluctantly agreed to let Isabella join the search, but only with the understanding that she would stay back with the vehicles once they reached the cave entrance. "The bears stopped here," called out Park Ranger Sarah Martinez from about 50 yards ahead. She was the most experienced tracker in the county, someone who knew these woods better than almost anyone alive. "They're waiting for us." Sure enough, the mother bear and her 2 cubs had positioned themselves at a natural clearing, where an old logging road disappeared into thick forest. The massive animal watched the approaching humans with what could only be described as patience, as if she understood exactly what was happening. "This is surreal," whispered Dr. Steele as they climbed out of their vehicles. "It's like she's leading a guided tour." Isabella approached the bears slowly, still carrying Sophia. The mother bear's eyes immediately focused on the baby carrier, and she let out a soft rumbling sound that seemed almost like approval. One of the cubs, curious about the humans, took a few steps closer before its mother gently nudged it back. "She recognizes Sophia," Isabella said with wonder. "Look at how she's watching her." Detective Kane checked his radio equipment and signaled to the rest of the search team. "We go slow, we stay together, and we follow the bear's lead." I know how crazy that sounds, but nothing about this situation is normal. The group began moving into the forest, following a path that seemed to exist only in the bear's understanding of the terrain. The mother bear would walk ahead for a few minutes, then stop and look back to make sure the humans were still following. Her cubs flanked the group like protective escorts, occasionally wandering off to investigate interesting scents before returning to their positions. As they climbed deeper into the wilderness, Isabella found herself thinking about Elena's childhood. Her sister had always been the adventurous one, the girl who would disappear for hours exploring the woods behind their house. Their mother used to joke that Elena spoke a language that only animals could understand. "Mrs. Cross," Ranger Martinez called from ahead, "you need to see this." Isabella hurried forward, careful not to jostle the sleeping Sophia. Martinez was standing beside a large pine tree where something had been carved into the bark. Fresh carvings made with what looked like a sharp stone. E plus S equals forever, Isabella read aloud, running her fingers over the crude letters. Elena and Sophia. She's been marking her path. But as they examined the tree more closely, Dr. Steele noticed something else. There are two different carving styles here. Look at these letters compared to these ones. She was right. Some of the marks were clearly made by Elena's hand, but others showed a different technique, a different tool. Someone else had been adding to Elena's trail markers. "How many people are we looking for?" Detective Kane asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. The bears had stopped again, this time at the edge of a steep ravine, where a narrow stream cut through the forest floor. The mother bear looked back at the humans, then began picking her way carefully down the rocky slope. Her message was clear. This was the way. "The cave system must be down there," Ranger Martinez said, studying Elena's map. "According to this, we should find the main entrance about a quarter-mile downstream." The descent was treacherous, especially for Isabella, who was still recovering from childbirth and trying to protect the baby she carried. Dr. Steele stayed close beside her, ready to help if she stumbled. The forest grew darker as they descended, the canopy above blocking out most of the morning sunlight. "Listen," Detective Kane said suddenly, holding up his hand for silence. Everyone stopped moving, straining to hear what had caught his attention. At first, there was only the sound of running water and wind through the trees, but then, faintly, they heard something that made Isabella's heart leap into her throat. Someone was singing. A woman's voice, weak but clear, was drifting through the forest from somewhere ahead of them. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, a lullaby that Isabella recognized from their childhood. Elena used to sing it to her when she was scared during thunderstorms. "Elena," Isabella whispered, tears starting to flow down her cheeks. But as they got closer to the source of the singing, they began to hear something else. Another voice, deeper and rougher, was harmonizing with Elena's melody. A man's voice, joining in the lullaby with words in what sounded like a different language entirely. The mother bear had led them to a wall of limestone that rose about 30 feet from the stream bed. Hidden behind a curtain of hanging moss and vines, a dark opening in the rock face marked the entrance to the cave system. The singing was coming from somewhere inside. "Elena?" Isabella called out, her voice echoing off the stone walls. "Elena, it's Isabella. I have Sophia. She's safe." The singing stopped abruptly. For a moment, the forest was completely silent except for the babbling of the stream. Then they heard movement from inside the cave, the sound of someone getting up and moving carefully through the darkness. "Isabella!" Elena's voice was weak, disbelieving. "Isabella, is that really you?" "Yes, it's me. I'm here with the police and medical help. We're going to get you out of here." But instead of relief, Elena's next word sent a chill through the entire search party. "You can't come in here," Elena called out urgently. "Not yet. There's something I need to explain first. Someone I need to tell you about." Detective Kane stepped forward. "Elena, this is Detective Kane. We've been looking for you for 6 months. Whatever the situation is, we can handle it. Just come out and let us help you." "You don't understand," Elena replied. and now her voice carried a note of desperation. "The person who's been helping me survive, the reason I'm still alive, you're not going to believe who it is." Dr. Steele was setting up her medical equipment, preparing for whatever condition they might find Elna in. "Elna, are you injured? Do you need immediate medical attention?" "I'm okay, weak, but okay. But Jacob, he's hurt. He's been hurt for a long time and he's scared. He doesn't trust strangers." Isabella felt the world tilt around her. "Jacob? Elena, who is Jacob?" There was a long pause before Elena answered, and when she did, her words sent shockwaves through everyone present. "Jacob Winters. He's been missing for 3 years. Everyone thinks he died in that avalanche up on Mount Harrison, but he didn't die. He's been living in these caves, and he's the one who saved my life when I got lost in the storm." Detective Kane's face went pale. He remembered the Jacob Winters case clearly. The 28-year-old wilderness guide had been leading a winter expedition when an avalanche hit their campsite. 2 bodies were recovered, but Jacob's was never found. After months of searching, he had been declared dead. "That's impossible," Detective Kane said. "Jacob Winters disappeared 3 years ago. The search for him was one of the most extensive in state history." "He's been hiding," Elena continued. "The avalanche hurt him badly. He has scars, brain injuries that affect his speech and memory. He was afraid that if he came back to civilization, people would think he was crazy. He's been living like a hermit, and the bears, they protect him. They've been bringing him food, keeping him safe." Isabella stared at the cave entrance, trying to process what her sister was telling them. "Elena, you're saying you've been living with a man who's been presumed dead for 3 years?" "He delivered Sophia when she was born," Elena said, her voice growing stronger. "He knew enough wilderness medicine to help me through the birth. If it hadn't been for Jacob, both Sophia and I would have died that night." Inside the cave, they could hear a low, rumbling conversation in voices too quiet to understand. Elena was apparently talking to this mysterious Jacob, trying to convince him of something. "He doesn't want to come out," Elena called to them after a few minutes. "He's afraid you'll think he's some kind of wild man. He's been alone for so long that he's forgotten how to be around people." Dr. Steele stepped closer to the cave entrance. "Jacob, if you can hear me, my name is Dr. Steele. I'm here to help, not to judge. If you've been injured, I can provide medical treatment. No one is going to force you to do anything you don't want to do." There was more quiet conversation from inside the cave, then Elena's voice again. "He says he remembers you, Detective Kane. He says you were one of the officers who came to his apartment after his roommate reported him missing. He says you have a scar on your left hand from a motorcycle accident when you were 22. Detective Kane looked down at his left hand in shock. The scar Elena was describing was barely visible, a thin white line across his knuckles that most people never noticed. Jacob Winters would have had no way of knowing about it unless he had seen it in person years ago. "Jacob," Detective Kane called out, his voice gentler now. "I remember you. I remember searching your apartment, talking to your friends and family. A lot of people have been worried about you for a very long time." Sophia chose that moment to wake up in her carrier, letting out a soft cry that echoed through the forest. The sound seemed to have an immediate effect on whatever conversation was happening inside the cave. "She wants to see her daughter," came a new voice from the darkness. It was deeper, rougher than Elena's, with an odd cadence that suggested some kind of speech difficulty, but it was unmistakably human. "She's been talking about her baby every day since I carried her to safety." Jacob Winters, presumed dead for 3 years, was alive, and he was about to emerge from the cave where he had been hiding from the world, protected by a family of bears and sustained by his determination to save the life of a pregnant woman who had wandered lost into his solitary existence. But as the search party waited for Jacob and Elena to emerge from their hiding place, none of them could have predicted the final twist that was about to unfold. Because Jacob Winters hadn't just been surviving in the wilderness for 3 years. He had been running from something. Something that explained why he had chosen to let the world believe he was dead rather than return to the life he had left behind, and that something was about to catch up with him. The first thing Isabella noticed when Elena finally emerged from the cave was how thin her sister had become. The woman who stepped into the filtered sunlight was barely recognizable as the vibrant, healthy person who had disappeared 6 months ago. Elena's clothes hung loose on her frame. Her hair was matted and streaked with gray that hadn't been there before, and her skin had the weathered look of someone who had been exposed to the elements for far too long. But her eyes were bright and alert, and when she saw Sophia sleeping peacefully in Isabella's arms, tears began streaming down her face. "My baby," Elena whispered, reaching out with trembling hands. "I can't believe she's really safe." Isabella carefully transferred Sophia to her sister's arms, watching as Elena cradled her daughter for the first time in weeks. The reunion was heartbreaking and beautiful at the same time. A moment of pure maternal love that made everyone present feel like they were witnessing something sacred. "She's grown so much," Elena said, studying Sophia's face with wonder. "She's perfect. You've been taking such good care of her." Dr. Steele approached slowly, giving the sisters their moment while preparing to conduct a medical examination. "Elena, I need to check you over. You've been through incredible trauma, and we need to make sure you're okay." But Elena's attention was focused on the cave entrance, where a figure was slowly emerging from the shadows. Jacob Winters looked like a man who had been carved from the wilderness itself. His hair and beard were long and unkempt. His clothes were a patchwork of materials that looked like they had been salvaged from multiple sources, and his skin was tanned and scarred from years of outdoor survival. But it was his eyes that caught Detective Kane's attention. They were the eyes of someone who had seen too much, experienced too much trauma, and had been running from something for far too long. "Jacob," Detective Kane said gently, "it's good to see you alive. A lot of people are going to be very relieved to know you survived." Jacob didn't respond immediately. He stood at the cave entrance, blinking in the bright daylight like someone who hadn't seen the sun in months. When he finally spoke, his words were slow and carefully chosen, as if each one required significant effort. People think I'm dead," he said, his voice carrying the rough quality of someone who rarely spoke. Sometimes I think that's better." Dr. Steele moved toward him with her medical kit. "Jacob, I'd like to examine you if that's okay. Elena mentioned that you have some injuries from the avalanche." Jacob instinctively stepped back toward the cave, his hand moving to his left temple where a large, jagged scar was visible through his hair. Don't like doctors. They ask too many questions." "I'm not here to ask questions, Doctor," Steele said reassuringly. "I'm here to help. You saved Elena's life and you helped deliver her baby. That makes you a hero in my book." Elena looked between Jacob and the search party, clearly torn between her relief at being found and her concern for the man who had become her protector. "Jacob has been having headaches," she said quietly. "Sometimes he forgets things, gets confused about where he is or what year it is, the avalanche. It did more than just physical damage." Ranger Martinez had been quietly observing the interaction, but now she stepped forward with a puzzled expression. "Jacob, I need to ask you something. The bears. Elena says they've been protecting you, bringing you food. In all my years working in these woods, I've never seen anything like that behavior. Jacob's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. Animals. Animals are honest. They don't lie, don't betray trust. Bears found me after the avalanche when I was dying. They brought me fish, berries, led me to water, to safe places to sleep. But that's not normal bear behavior, Ranger Martinez pressed gently. Wild animals don't typically form bonds with humans like that. Jacob looked directly at her for the first time, and his eyes held a clarity that hadn't been there moments before. Nothing about what happened to me was normal. Before anyone could ask what he meant by that, Sophia began to fuss in Elena's arms. The baby's cry seemed to trigger something in Jacob, a protective instinct that was immediate and powerful. He moved toward Elena and the baby with surprising speed, his entire demeanor changing from cautious to alert. "She's hungry," he said with confidence. "Been crying like that for 3 days before we sent her to the hospital. Need to feed her soon or she'll get sick." Isabella watched this interaction with growing fascination. Jacob's behavior around Sophia was completely different from his wariness around the adults. With the baby, he was confident, knowledgeable, almost paternal. "Jacob," Isabella said carefully, "Elena told us you helped deliver Sophia. Do you have medical training?" Jacob's expression clouded again, and he seemed to struggle with the question. I remember things sometimes, things I learned before, but I don't remember where I learned them or when." Dr. Steele had been quietly observing Jacob's behavior, and now she stepped closer. "Jacob, I think you might be experiencing some form of traumatic brain injury. The memory issues, the headaches, the confusion about time and place, these are all symptoms of severe head trauma." "Doctor," Elena interjected, "there's something else you should know. Jacob, he's been having nightmares almost every night. He talks in his sleep, says things about being chased, about people trying to hurt him." Detective Kane's instincts suddenly sharpened. "What kind of things does he say?" Elena looked at Jacob, who nodded slightly as if giving her permission to continue. "He mentions names, places. Sometimes he talks about money, about someone named Vincent who was angry about something, and he keeps saying, 'They think I stole it,' over and over." The detective felt a chill run down his spine. Vincent was not a common name in their small town, but he knew of one Vincent who had been involved in criminal activities around the time of Jacob's disappearance. Vincent Moreau, a man who had been suspected of running an illegal gambling and money laundering operation out of several businesses in the region. "Jacob," Detective Kane said slowly, "when you disappeared 3 years ago, were you involved with Vincent Moreau in any way?" Jacob's reaction was immediate and dramatic. He stumbled backward as if he had been struck, his hand going to his head where the scar was located. "Vincent was supposed to be my friend. He said he needed help with his business." The pieces of a puzzle that Detective Kane had been trying to solve for years were suddenly falling into place. 3 years ago, there had been a series of break-ins at businesses connected to Vincent Moreau's operation. Money had been stolen, records had been destroyed, and witnesses had been too afraid to come forward. The case had gone cold when their main potential witness, Jacob Winters, had disappeared into the mountains. "Jacob, what did Vincent ask you to do?" Detective Kane asked gently. Jacob was clearly struggling now, his breathing becoming rapid and shallow. Elena moved closer to him, still holding Sophia, offering what comfort she could. "He wanted me to guide people through the mountains," Jacob said haltingly. "Special trips, off the regular trails. He said it was for wealthy clients who wanted privacy, but the people I was guiding weren't tourists." "What were they carrying?" Detective Kane pressed. bags, heavy bags. They never let me see inside, but I knew it wasn't camping gear. And the places Vincent wanted me to take them, they were near the old mining caves, places where things could be hidden. Dr. Steele was monitoring Jacob's vital signs as he spoke, noting his elevated heart rate and the way his hands shook when he talked about Vincent. "We need to take this slowly," she cautioned. "Jacob is showing signs of severe psychological distress." But Jacob continued, as if the words had been trapped inside him for years and were finally finding their way out. "I figured out what was happening. Vincent was using my wilderness guide business to move money, to hide evidence. I was helping criminals without knowing it." "So you tried to stop working with him?" Isabella asked. Jacob nodded, but his expression grew darker. "I told Vincent I wanted out. I said I was going to report what I had seen to the police. He got angry, said I knew too much, that I was a liability." "Jacob," Detective Kane said carefully, "are you saying that Vincent Moreau tried to have you killed?" Before Jacob could answer, a sound echoed through the forest that made everyone freeze. It was the distant sound of vehicles approaching on the old logging road, multiple engines moving fast through the woods toward their location. The mother bear, who had been resting peacefully near the stream with her cubs, suddenly stood up and let out a low, warning growl. Her entire posture changed, shifting from protective guardian to active threat assessment. "That's not our backup," Detective Kane said, reaching for his radio. "I didn't call for additional units." Jacob's face went pale beneath his tan, and his eyes took on the haunted look of prey that knows it's been found by predators. "He found me," Jacob whispered. "After all this time, Vincent found me." Elena clutched Sophia closer to her chest, her maternal instincts kicking into overdrive. "Jacob, what are you talking about? How could he have found you?" "The hospital," Jacob said, his voice growing more urgent with each word. "When the bear took Sophia to the hospital, when the police started investigating. Vincent has people everywhere. He would have heard about the search party, about someone finding Elena in the caves." Detective Kane was already moving, herding the group toward better cover among the rocks near the cave entrance. How many people would Vincent bring? "Enough," Jacob said grimly. "He doesn't take chances. He's been looking for me for 3 years, and now he knows exactly where I am." The sound of the approaching vehicles was getting closer, and now they could hear voices shouting in the distance. Harsh, urgent voices that didn't sound like they belonged to any official rescue operation. "We need to get everyone to safety," Dr. Steele said, quickly packing up her medical equipment. "Elena, can you make it back into the cave with the baby?" But Jacob was shaking his head. "The cave is a trap if they find us. Only one way in or out. We need to move, need to get to higher ground." "Jacob," Elena said urgently, "you know these woods better than anyone. Where can we go?" Jacob looked around the forest with the calculating gaze of someone who had been surviving in the wilderness for 3 years. His brain injury might have affected his memory and speech, but his survival instincts were sharp and reliable. "There's another cave system about a mile upstream," he said, his voice becoming clearer as adrenaline overrode his confusion. "Hidden entrance behind a waterfall. The bears showed it to me during my first winter. Vincent's people will never find it." The mother bear seemed to understand the urgency of the situation. She gathered her cubs with a series of low vocalizations and began moving upstream along the rocky bank of the stream. Her message was clear: "Follow us, and do it quickly." "Can you make it?" Isabella asked Elena, who was still weak from months of survival living and now carrying a baby. "I have to," Elena replied firmly. "If Vincent hurt Jacob once, he'll hurt him again, and he'll hurt anyone who tries to protect him. As the group began to move away from the cave entrance, following the bears toward what they hoped would be safety, Detective Kane was already planning his next move. He had finally found the witness who could put Vincent Moreau away for good. But first, he had to keep Jacob alive long enough to testify. The sound of the vehicles had stopped, replaced by the noise of men on foot crashing through the underbrush. They were professional trackers, experienced hunters who knew how to move through wilderness terrain, and they were getting closer by the minute. Jacob looked back toward the cave one last time, then at the people who had risked everything to find him and Elena. For 3 years, he had been running and hiding, letting the world believe he was dead rather than face the truth about what he had witnessed. But now, with Elena's baby depending on all of them for safety, Jacob realized that running wasn't enough anymore. Vincent Moreau had found him despite all his precautions, despite the protection of the bears, despite 3 years of perfect isolation. It was time to stop running and start fighting back. The question was whether they could reach safety before Vincent's men reached them, and whether Jacob's damaged memory would be clear enough when the time came to finally tell the truth about what had happened in the mountains 3 years ago. Because the real story of Jacob's disappearance was even more shocking than anyone realized. Vincent Moreau hadn't just tried to kill Jacob to keep him quiet. He had succeeded. Jacob Winters had died in that avalanche 3 years ago. The man who had been living in the caves, the man who had saved Elena's life and delivered her baby, was someone else entirely. Someone who had taken Jacob's identity to escape from an even more dangerous situation. And Vincent Moreau wasn't the only one who wanted him dead. The escape through the forest became a desperate race against time, with the mother bear leading the way along treacherous rocky paths that only someone who had lived in these woods for years would know existed. Jacob moved with surprising agility despite his injuries, helping Elena navigate the rough terrain while she clutched Sophia protectively against her chest. "Stay low," Jacob whispered urgently, as they heard voices getting closer behind them. "Vincent's men are good trackers, but they don't know the forest like we do." Detective Kane brought up the rear, his service weapon drawn and ready, though he hoped they wouldn't need to use it with a baby in the group. Dr. Steele and Ranger Martinez flanked Isabella, who was struggling to keep up after her recent childbirth, but refusing to slow down the group. The sound of rushing water grew louder as they approached the waterfall Jacob had mentioned. It was a spectacular sight, a 30-foot cascade tumbling over granite cliffs into a deep pool surrounded by moss-covered rocks. But more importantly, it was loud enough to mask their voices and movements. "There," Jacob pointed to what looked like solid rock face behind the falling water. "The entrance is behind the falls. We have to wade through the pool and climb up about 6 feet. The bears showed me this place during a storm last winter." Isabella stared at the rushing water with apprehension. "Elena, can you make it with Sophia?" Elena's jaw was set with determination. "I've made it this far. I'm not stopping now." The mother bear had already entered the pool, her massive form moving through the chest-deep water with ease. Her cubs followed, demonstrating that the crossing was possible. But for humans carrying a baby and medical equipment, it would be challenging. "I'll go first," Jacob said, already wading into the cold mountain water. "Test the footing, find the safest path." As Jacob made his way across the pool, Detective Kane's radio crackled to life. He had been trying to call for backup, but the signal was weak this deep in the forest. "Detective Kane, this is Officer Rodriguez," came a scratchy voice through the static. "We've got a problem. 3 vehicles full of armed men just drove past our checkpoint. They're heading toward your location and they're not responding to our attempts to stop them." "Copy that," Detective Kane replied quietly. We're mobile and heading to a secure location. Do not engage until you have overwhelming numbers. These people are extremely dangerous." Behind them, the voices of their pursuers were getting closer. They could hear men calling to each other, coordinating their search pattern like a military operation. "Found something," one voice shouted. "Fresh tracks leading toward the water." Jacob had reached the other side of the pool and was examining the rock face behind the waterfall. "Here," he called back to the group. "The opening is here, but it's narrow. We'll have to go through one at a time." Dr. Steele went next, carefully protecting her medical equipment as she waded through the cold water. The current was stronger than it looked, and she had to fight to maintain her footing on the slippery rocks below. Elena followed, holding Sophia high above the water. The baby had woken up and was crying from the cold and noise, but Elena pressed forward with single-minded determination. When she slipped on a wet rock, Jacob was there immediately, steadying her and helping her reach the hidden entrance. "Your turn," Detective Kane told Isabella. "I'll cover the rear." But as Isabella entered the water, something happened that changed everything. The voices behind them suddenly grew much louder, and they heard the unmistakable sound of automatic weapons being loaded. "Target acquired," someone shouted. "It's definitely him." Vincent was right. Jacob Winters is alive. Jacob's reaction to hearing his name was immediate and terrifying. He stumbled backward against the rock face, his hands going to his head as if he was in physical pain. "No," he said, his voice filled with anguish. "No, no, no. Jacob is dead. Jacob died in the avalanche. I can't be." Elena stared at him in shock. "What are you talking about, Jacob? What's wrong?" But Jacob was having some kind of breakdown, his fragmented memory apparently triggered by the stress of being hunted. My name is..." He struggled with the words, his face contorting with effort. "My name is David Chen. I was there when Jacob died." Dr. Steele, who had just made it through the cave entrance, turned back to listen to this revelation. "David, you need to calm down. Tell us what you remember." "The avalanche," David said, his words coming faster now as memories seemed to flood back. "Jacob and I were both on the mountain. We were both running from Vincent, but for different reasons. Jacob had seen too much of Vincent's operation, and I had stolen something from Vincent, something that could destroy him." Isabella was still in the water, but she had stopped moving, transfixed by what she was hearing. "What did you steal?" "Financial records, computer files, evidence of everything Vincent was doing, the money laundering, the drug trafficking, the people he had killed to protect his operation. I was Vincent's accountant, and I copied everything before I tried to run." Detective Kane's eyes widened. "David Chen. I remember that name from the case files. Vincent reported you as an embezzling employee who had disappeared with a company funds. I took the money to survive, but more importantly, I took the evidence. Vincent had killed 3 people to keep his secret safe, and I knew I was next on his list." The sound of their pursuers was getting closer. They could hear splashing as the men reached the pool. "Move," Detective Kane urged. "We can sort this out once we're safe." David helped Isabella through the water as she struggled to reach the cave entrance. But as they neared safety, Dr. Steele called out from inside the hidden cave. "We have another problem," she said urgently. "There's someone else in here." Everyone froze. The cave was supposed to be empty, a secret hideout that only David and the bears knew about. "Who is it?" Elena whispered, clutching Sophia closer. Dr. Steele's voice carried a note of amazement. "It's an elderly man. He appears to be injured, and he's asking for someone named David Chen." David's face went pale. "Professor Martinez," he breathed. "Oh, God, he's still alive." "Who is Professor Martinez?" Isabella asked as she finally made it to the cave entrance. "Vincent's former business partner. The one person who knew more about Vincent's operation than I did. Vincent tried to have him killed 6 months ago, but the professor escaped. I thought Vincent had found him and finished the job." As the group squeezed through the narrow cave entrance one by one, they found themselves in a large underground chamber lit by several camping lanterns. The elderly man Dr. Steele had found was lying on a makeshift bed, clearly weak but alert. "David," Professor Martinez said when he saw the man he knew as Jacob Winters, "thank God you're alive. I've been waiting here for weeks, hoping you would return." "Professor, how did you find this place?" "The same way you did. The bears led me here when Vincent's men were closing in. These animals, they seem to understand when humans need protection." Detective Kane was scanning the cave, looking for additional exits in case they were trapped. "Professor Martinez, I'm Detective Kane. We need to get all of you to safety, but first, I need to understand what we're dealing with. What exactly does Vincent Moreau want with David?" Professor Martinez struggled to sit up, aided by Dr. Steele. "Vincent doesn't just want David dead. He wants the encryption key that David created to lock the evidence files. Without that key, the information David stole is useless." "What encryption key?" David asked, looking confused. "The one you created using your girlfriend's birthday and your mother's maiden name," Professor Martinez explained. "You told me about it the night before you disappeared. You said if anything happened to you, I should tell the authorities about the pattern you used." David's expression changed as another memory surfaced. "Sarah's birthday, my mother's name, I remember now. But Sarah, what happened to Sarah?" Professor Martinez's expression grew grim. "Vincent killed her 2 weeks after you disappeared. Made it look like a car accident. He was trying to find the encryption key, but she didn't know anything about it." The revelation hit David like a physical blow. He sank to his knees, overwhelmed by grief and guilt. "Sarah is dead because of me, because I tried to do the right thing." Elena knelt beside him, still holding Sophia. "David, this isn't your fault. Vincent is responsible for all of this." But David was shaking his head. "You don't understand. When I took Jacob's identity after the avalanche, I thought I was protecting myself. But I was also protecting that encryption key. As long as everyone thought David Chen was dead, the files would stay locked forever." Outside the cave, they could hear Vincent's men getting closer to the waterfall. The sound of their voices echoed off the rocks as they searched for the hidden entrance. "We need to make a decision," Detective Kane said. "Do we stay hidden and hope they don't find us, or do we try to make a run for it?" Professor Martinez reached into a waterproof bag beside his makeshift bed. "There's a third option," he said, pulling out a satellite phone and a portable hard drive. "I've been in contact with federal agents for weeks, feeding them information about Vincent's operation. They're on their way here right now." "How long until they arrive?" Dr. Steele asked. 20 minutes, maybe less. But we need to survive that long." David stood up, his expression resolving into something Isabella hadn't seen before. Determination mixed with a desire for justice. "I'm tired of running. I'm tired of hiding. Sarah is dead, and Vincent has been hurting people for years because I was too scared to come forward." "David, what are you thinking?" Elena asked. "I'm thinking it's time to end this. I'm going to give Vincent exactly what he wants, me. But when I do, I'm going to make sure the whole world knows the truth about what he's done." Before anyone could stop him, David was moving toward the cave entrance. But as he reached the narrow opening, the mother bear suddenly appeared, blocking his path with her massive body. The bear looked directly at David, then at the baby in Elena's arms, then back at David. Her message was clear. Protecting the innocent was more important than seeking revenge. "She's right," Isabella said quietly. "We have a baby to think about. We have Elena and the professor to protect. Vincent's men are armed and desperate. This isn't the time for heroics." But even as Isabella spoke, they all knew that their time was running out. Vincent's men were systematic and thorough, and it was only a matter of time before they found the hidden entrance to the cave. The question was whether federal backup would arrive in time, or whether the final confrontation with Vincent Moreau would happen in this hidden chamber, with a newborn baby and injured people caught in the crossfire. David looked around at the group of people who had risked everything to help him and Elena. For 3 years, he had been living as a dead man, surviving in the wilderness while the woman he loved was murdered, and the criminal he could have stopped continued to hurt innocent people. But now, surrounded by strangers who had become allies, holding the encryption key that could finally bring Vincent to justice, David Chen realized that he had a choice to make. He could remain David Chen the survivor, or he could become David Chen the hero. The sound of automatic weapons fire suddenly echoed through the forest outside, followed by shouts and the roar of helicopter engines approaching fast. The federal agents had arrived, but so had Vincent Moreau himself, and the final battle for the truth was about to begin in the most unlikely of places, a hidden cave behind a waterfall, protected by a family of bears and defended by a group of people who had never met before that morning, but who were now bound together by their determination to protect an innocent baby and see justice done. The encryption key that could destroy Vincent's criminal empire was locked in the damaged memory of a man who had been presumed dead for 3 years. But David Chen was about to remember everything. And when he did, Vincent Moreau's reign of terror would finally come to an end. As the sound of gunfire erupted outside the cave, David closed his eyes and let the memories flood back. Sarah's laugh on their first date. Her birthday, March 15th, 1992. His mother's maiden name, Kowalski. The pattern came together like pieces of a puzzle he had been trying to solve for 3 years. "I remember," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Sarah, 315, Kowalski, 92. That's the key." Professor Martinez immediately began typing on his laptop, entering the encryption code into the files he had been protecting. One by one, documents began to unlock. Financial records, communication logs, photographs, and video evidence of Vincent's crimes spanning over a decade. "We've got him," Professor Martinez said with satisfaction. "Every murder, every money laundering operation, every corrupt official he's bribed, it's all here." Outside, they could hear Vincent's voice shouting orders to his men, but it was being answered by the authoritative commands of federal agents. The cavalry had arrived just in time. Detective Kane spoke into his radio, coordinating with the federal team. "This is Detective Kane. We have key witnesses and evidence in a cave behind the waterfall. Request immediate protection for civilians, including a newborn infant." Elena looked down at Sophia, who had somehow slept through most of the chaos, and then at David, who was staring at the unlocked files with a mixture of vindication and sorrow. "It's over," Elena said softly. "Sarah can finally rest in peace." David nodded, but his attention was drawn to something else. The mother bear had appeared at the cave entrance again, but this time she wasn't blocking their path. She was looking back toward the forest with what could only be described as satisfaction, as if she understood that the threat had passed. "She knew," Isabella said in wonder. "She knew we'd be safe here. She led us to exactly where we needed to be." Dr. Steele was checking on everyone's condition when they heard a new voice from outside the cave. Calm, professional, and unmistakably federal. This is Agent Sarah Michelle Torres, FBI. You are surrounded and outgunned. Vincent Moreau, you are under arrest for multiple charges of murder, conspiracy, and racketeering. The irony of the agent's name was not lost on David. Sarah. Another Sarah who was bringing justice for the Sarah he had lost. Vincent Moreau, Agent Torres continued. We have the financial records. We have the witness testimony. And we have David Chen, very much alive and ready to testify against you. The response from outside was a string of curses, followed by the sound of someone being forcibly detained. An hour later, as the sun reached its peak in the sky, the group emerged from the cave to find the forest clearing filled with federal agents, paramedics, and the subdued figures of Vincent's men in handcuffs. Vincent himself was being loaded into an armored vehicle, his empire finally crumbling around him. Agent Torres approached them with a warm smile. Mr. Chen, it's good to finally meet you. We've been looking for you for a very long time. David shook her hand, still processing the fact that his 3-year nightmare was finally over. Agent Torres, I owe you more than you know, and I owe these people everything. He gestured to Elena, Isabella, Doctor, Steele, Detective Kane, and Ranger Martinez. Actually, Agent Torres said, I think we all owe them something. This case couldn't have been solved without everyone working together. As paramedics checked over Elena and Sophia, ensuring they were both healthy enough to travel, Isabella found herself standing beside the stream where this incredible day had begun. The mother bear and her cubs were visible on the far bank, watching the proceedings with the patient calm of creatures who had completed their mission. Thank you, Isabella called out to them, knowing it probably sounded foolish but not caring. The mother bear seemed to nod once before turning and leading her cubs back into the forest, their job done. 6 months later, Isabella sat in her living room holding both Sophia and her own daughter Maya, watching the evening news. The reporter was covering the sentencing of Vincent Moreau, who had received life in prison without the possibility of parole for his crimes. The case was solved, the reporter said, thanks to the testimony of David Chen, a man who had been presumed dead for 3 years, and the evidence provided by Professor Martinez. Both men credited their survival to an unlikely alliance with a family of wild bears who protected them in the wilderness. David appeared on screen, clean-shaven and wearing a suit, looking nothing like the wild man who had emerged from the caves. He was now working with federal authorities to help dismantle other criminal organizations, using his expertise in financial systems to fight crime instead of hiding from it. I learned something important during my time in the wilderness, David told the reporter. Sometimes the most unexpected protectors appear in our lives exactly when we need them most. Family isn't just about blood relations. It's about who steps up to keep you safe when the world becomes dangerous. Elena entered the room, carrying 2 cups of tea. She had gained back the weight she had lost in the forest and looked healthy and strong again. She had moved in with Isabella permanently, and the 2 sisters were raising Sophia and Maya together like the family unit they had always been meant to be. Any regrets? Elena asked, settling down beside her sister. Isabella looked at the 2 babies sleeping peacefully in her arms, thought about the incredible journey that had brought them all together, and smiled. Only one, she said. I regret that it took a crisis for us to realize how much we need each other. Outside their window, the lights of Cedar Valley Hospital twinkled in the distance. In the maternity ward, new babies were being born, new families were being formed, and the staff still told the story of the night a bear delivered a baby to safety. But in the forest surrounding the hospital, life continued its ancient rhythms. The mother bear and her cubs had returned to their normal routines, their brief venture into human affairs now just another chapter in their wild lives, Yet sometimes, on quiet nights when the moon was full, hospital staff swore they could see the silhouette of a large bear at the edge of the forest, standing guard like a sentinel, watching over the place where miracles could still happen and where the bonds of family could overcome any obstacle. Dr. Steele, who had been promoted to head of the maternity ward, kept a photo on her desk from that extraordinary day. It showed all of them standing together outside the cave. Elena holding Sophia, Isabella with baby Maya, David looking relieved and free for the first time in years, Detective Kane and Ranger Martinez smiling with satisfaction, and in the background, barely visible but unmistakably there, the mother bear watching over them all. She titled the photo, "The Day We Learned That Heroes Come in All Forms." Because sometimes, in a world that can seem cold and dangerous and uncertain, the most powerful force is still the simple determination of mothers, human and otherwise, to protect the innocent and keep their families safe. And sometimes, the most unlikely alliances can change everything. The story of the mother bear who showed up at the maternity ward cradling a newborn had become legend in Cedar Valley. But for those who lived it, it would always be a reminder that love, protection, and family can triumph over any adversity, and that sometimes the greatest courage comes from simply refusing to give up on the people we care about. In the end, Sophia Elena Cross grew up knowing that she had been protected by the fierce love of not just one mother, but many: her birth mother Elena, her adoptive mother Isabella, and a wild bear who had carried her to safety when no human could. And she grew up believing, as all children should, that the world is full of guardians watching over us, even when we can't see them.